So Tony Northrup recently released actually 2 videos on camera settings, and then I was doing my weekly live show, that does still happen, sharing this fantastic article on the 5 key elements for quality photography. And I realized that I'm always teaching and sharing my approach, the settings I think about on the scenes that we walk up to on these photography workshops, but I haven't taken a few moments to share with you all my kind of approach to photographing and choosing my settings. But here's the thing, and this is what triggered it for me. Item number 5, intuition, which at face value sounds a little kind of gobbledygook, but at its heart, it means to get beyond those settings and really focus on the image itself. As I explained it in my show the other day, we've got only so much brain power that we can devote to any one thing, and as we lift the camera to our eye, the more thinking that we're doing about the settings, the less we can spare to think about composition, about capturing the moment, about making sure that that annoying branch isn't creeping into the frame. And so I do want to take a few moments and offer you some advice, because as you move beyond those basic settings and focus more on composition, your photography is going to improve immensely. I shoot on manual almost all of the time, and the first setting that I'm usually thinking about is aperture. What do I want my depth of field to be for this image? If it's a portrait, I'm probably going to choose something wide, like f2.8 to isolate my subject from the background. Or if it's a scenic landscape, something closer to roughly f8. I'm going to be back with a much more detailed video all about aperture soon. Next, I check in with my shutter speed. I want to make sure it's fast enough for the focal length I'm using. A safe rule of thumb is 2 times your focal length. So if I'm shooting with a 50mm lens, 1/100th of a second is safe. I've got a whole detailed video already up and out about shutter speed. You can see that linked right here and at the end of this video. And of course, this approach doesn't work when shooting action. This is the general travel and landscape. Now at this point, you might be wondering, why don't I shoot on AV priority, where I let the camera decide the shutter speed? I pick aperture and the camera does the rest. And the answer is, I've too often been burned by poor camera choices on shutter speed, especially if my subject is moving. It doesn't even have to be fast, just simple walking. The camera doesn't know what your subject's up to, and on AV mode, you're gonna end up with a blurry subject if you're not paying attention to that number. And yes, you can set minimums in many cameras, but then that creates limitations in other ways. By keeping it manual, I know in my brain that I need to decide the shutter speed or at least check in on it, and I know through practice what I can get away with, and I've often checked that even before I bring the camera up to my eye. But I do use auto ISO, because that setting matters the least to me. I mean, ISO just adds some noise to the image, and with most modern cameras, the ISO has to get pretty high for me to be bothered by it. And if that's where it needs to be anyway, for my other settings to be correct, well, not having it on auto isn't going to change anything. And if I'm being honest, most of my throwaway images are due to poor composition or timing, sometimes aperture, sometimes shutter speed, and so very few images because of a bit of noise. Now, an additional trick that your camera might support. Often I find my settings to be similar for a group of shots, and all I'll really want to do is control the brightness. A quick turn of the exposure compensation dial fixes that. Shooting full manual with auto ISO on and the exposure compensation active is supported by some cameras. Try it out. You can follow me on Instagram, where I share the settings of my images when they matter mostly. That's been shutter speed that I've been sharing with you all. Astrophotography, moving water. I think it's helpful for you to see for long or short, how long or short a shutter speed is necessary for certain looks. I don't as often share aperture, but maybe I should, because one of the misconceptions I hear from beginners is that they need to shoot at f16 to get everything in focus. And for many landscapes with normal or wide-angle lenses, you can be at a much lower aperture, a much wider aperture, and still have everything in focus. But that's a topic for a future video. If you found this video helpful, give it a quick thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe along with hitting that little bell notification so that you'll be notified of future tips, tricks, and gear reviews. And I'd love to know in the comments how you feel, what settings you think about first, and why. Thanks so much for watching. Bye-bye.